Temple.
It opens to another world.
Yeah, this is good, yeah. Mr. Mick Jackson's here at the Paso Film Festival. We just screened Temple Grandin, and thank you for a very moving and very important movie, Mick. Let's just go back to maybe when you got the first call or how this movie came to you.
Well, it just, a messenger brought it round to my house. I had no idea what it was, and my agent called up and said, "We're sending you the Temple Grandin movie. From HBO, sending you the script." And I said, what's that? They said, "Oh, you'll see." So I started reading the script, and I thought, Temple, that must be something to do with architecture or a religion or something like that. And I started reading it, realized it was somebody's name, and then the more I turned the pages, the more it seemed to be an extraordinary story where you literally could not guess what was going to happen next, and you turned the page, and you turned the page. And I put away I started to read it while I was having dinner. I put away the plate, and I just closed the final page and turned to my wife and said, "Look, I've got to make this movie. This is the most incredible story. I had to make this movie."
Wow.
And really, at the same time, I was kind of moved by Temple's story. I thought it was just completely unbelievable. If you were writing a fictional story, you just wouldn't believe that all those twists and turns could happen to her. She could start out as an autistic child who didn't speak until the age of 4, and she ends up as a world authority on animal behavior and a professor at a university. It's just extraordinary. And I could see that her geographical journey, she was born on the East Coast as a kid, ending up in the American West, very much part of the American West, isn't very great, but the psychic journey and the personal journey and the emotional journey from that one point, from not being able to speak to being a world expert on something, a world authority on something, is enormous, enormous. And I realized I could do something with that story, because the more I studied Temple, she was the very first person to describe from the inside what it was like to be autistic. No one knew until that moment. Everybody knew the parents' story, and everybody was deeply sympathetic to the parents, how difficult it was to cope with the unpredictability and the rage and the tantrums and the drifting away. But nobody knew what it was like inside. Was the first person able to put it down, making this film. Particularly, an autistic world is a fearful place. She made the comparison with animals because she seemed to feel this kind of empathy with animals that she couldn't feel easily with human beings, not even with her own mother. She couldn't be hugged. But she felt it for animals. And she felt that she, as an autistic child, was like a prey animal. The world is full of danger, and everything in the world just impinged on her enormously, loud and vivid and close up, just like in a movie. And I realized that the way she saw the world, the vividness that she saw the world, was the vividness of a movie, and I could actually use a movie to tell what it was like inside her head. Wow. With everybody, if you know what's inside their head, then the unpredictable behavior suddenly makes sense, and if you have no idea what's going on in their head, it's just bizarre and disruptive. So these two elements of showing what she felt about what she experienced of the world, what she saw in these very vivid cinematic terms, close-up, loud sound, music, fast-cut images, was get a sense of that turmoil and confusion and the strange connections going on inside their head. Then you can understand the strange behavior, and then you can help. Because it's really two stories in one. It's the story from inside Temple, how she saw the world and this tremendous force of personality, that you realize she was trapped in a cage of autism and fought her way out, and the story of the people around her, which I think is a great lesson. The people around her, her mother, her aunt, her inspiring science teacher at high school, they saw something strange and wonderful about her. They saw that these perceptions were not bizarre, they had a kind of off-kilter logic to them, but they were logical. And it pushed her, her mother particularly, pushed her out into the world when other people might have taken the advice of doctors and said, "Look, we'll put her in an institution, you can't possibly care for her, it's too specialized the care. We'll look after her and lock her away." And she said, "I will not do that to my child. I will push her out into the world." Her mother pushed her constantly drilled her in rules, drilled her in manners, got her to listen to what people were saying, explained what it meant. Her aunt cared for her on the ranch. She was exposed to these wonderful experiences with animals and this kind of empathy that she had, and saw how the animals were calmed in this kind of cage they were held in while they were inoculated, and how that pressure seemed to calm the animal down. And as you've seen in the movie, she put herself in one of those cages during a panic attack and asked her aunt to close the gates on her, and the pressure calmed her down. And she realized that if I could make a machine that would do this for me, I could calm myself down, I could control the pressure. One of the problems is when someone else hugs you, it's kind of uncontrollable. You know, they put their arms around you and they squeeze, and it's kind of claustrophobic and panic-making. But if you can control the pressure yourself, you can get the same kind of effect as if you were being hugged. So her aunt saw that, saw her efforts to make it. Her high school teacher, Dr. Carlock, Mr. Carlock he actually was, we made him a doctor just for the sake of the movie, saw that too, and saw that she had a scientific reasoning inside her head. She could see all these details and make connections between them in the way that a scientist does. So all these people helped her. They really pushed her and helped her get to the place where she now is, where it's unusual for a child with autism to get as far as high school, but she put herself through high school and college and a master's degree and a doctorate. And now not only does she lecture at cattle conventions and book signings and things, she gets on a plane by herself every single day of the year and travels to a different city. And it's astonishing how independent she is in the world. It's just an astonishing story. Not everybody's story is like that who suffers from autism, but I think what you can do with the movie is not tell everybody's story. You can tell one story particularly well, one story with focus, and you realize from that story how much else is true of every other autistic child. That if we do care for them, if we don't kind of stint in our pressure for them to go out into the world to have real experiences with real things in the world, that they will always be fearful, they'll always be shut in. And it takes a long time sometimes. In Temple's case, it took years and years and years. But the people didn't give up. They pushed and pushed and pushed and were steadfast in that pressure for her to confront things in the world and be strong. And she is.
Wow. When did you, in the process, when did you actually get to meet Temple?
I went to meet her in Fort Collins in Colorado, where she's lecturing, before I started on the movie.
Oh.
I sat down with her in a coffee shop and she remembered everything. She remembered every detail of her life. I said, "Want to have the proper recreate your apartment in Arizona?" And she described it in great detail. She described exactly what typewriter she'd had. It was a grade student typewriter, Mark 340, and so on. I was writing this stuff down on paper napkins in the cafe, trying to keep up with her, stuffing them in my pocket. And I said, "Well, how did the gate work that you designed for your aunt's ranch? It opened itself and closed itself after putting a coffee." She said, I'll draw it for you. Look here. And I put that in my pocket too. So all this was a wonderful supplement to what was already in her books about how she thought.
Right.
One of the great things, I have to tell you, one of the most satisfying things, in the movie you see her teacher, played by David Strathairn, talking to her, and she makes all these rapid-fire kind of quicksilver associations between things in her head, like a kind of stream of consciousness. And when the movie was finished, Temple came to HBO and sat down in the screening room, and for the first time since we started it, like 18 months earlier, we ran the movie for her. With all the studio executives there, everybody very expectant to know what would she make of this movie. And the lights went up, there was complete silence. And she hadn't realized that she was expected to say something, so I sort of prompted her and said, "Well, Temple, what do you think?" She said, "Oh, it's fantastic, it's fantastic, don't change your word." She's very still very big in her, and loud, but controlling it a little bit. That wasn't the point. That was very satisfying to me. The point was that later I was driving my car, and my phone rang in the car, much later, after I thought she'd gone back to Colorado. And it was Temple again, saying, "Oh, I love that movie." And as she started to kind of enthuse on the telephone, I realized the movie once, a single screening, a long movie, nearly 2 hours, shot by shot by shot by shot by shot. She said, "I love where that shot comes, and it pans, and then you cut to it, and then you..." And I realized that she had downloaded, like a DVD, the entire movie on one screening, photographically into her head, and she could run it at will, backwards and forwards, like you would forward and reverse a DVD. So I sort of believed it enough to put it in the film, but actually to have that confirmed from her.
Wow.
And all the diagrams and things. She says, that's the way I think. I'm a pattern thinker. I think in patterns like that. It was great confirmation.
Wow.
And she said, I watched the movie. So I talked to her afterwards. I said, well, did that feel real to you? She said, well, I recognized Julia Ormond and I recognized David Strathairn and Catherine O'Hara. I'd seen them in movies. But that wasn't Claire Danes. That was me. That was the young me on the screen. That was me. I'm living that. And that was extraordinary, too.
Wow.
Claire had really nailed it to that.
Well, when I ended up calling her, and she went and looked at her calendar and saw that she's doing this time of the year, doing her cattle.
She's doing something new. She's booked every day for years.
Oh, yeah. She started just in that kind of excitement you speak of, telling me how important it is now to get this word out and this movie to be seen, and that she wanted to give me your phone number. And so you can see she carries it even further into the future of the importance of this.
Yes.
She's in that understanding.
It's a teaching tool in a way. I thought I was making a movie, but I think it does help you understand.
And opening, enlightening, sort of opening minds.
Which we've talked about is we're in a pandemic of this. This isn't fiction. This is a reality.
The more we talk about it, the more. The other thing that Temple said to me afterwards was that, there's a lot of people out there who have autism, who just aren't diagnosed, and I don't want them to be diagnosed. You walk into Silicon Valley, these people focused, not very social, but focused on what they're doing in their little cubicles. They probably have some degree of autism spectrum disorder. Wow. But nobody told them, and they don't worry about it. They're secure in their little niche in the world, doing this useful job in the world. You walk into a movie set, you see all these people making props and things. She said, I could walk into any room on a movie and tell you there's 5, 6, 7 people with autism in here. But they don't know it, and they shouldn't know it. Nobody should give them a diagnosis and a classification and treat them specially. They found their little niche in the world, and they're occupying it. They're doing good things in the world. So I think if that teaches us anything, it's this story is help them, but don't kind of classify them in a way that restricts their lives.
Yeah, and then pull them out of society.
Pull them out of society and shut them in an institution.
Right.
They're happy when they are.
Right. Wow.
It doesn't work for everybody, but I think a high proportion of kids who do have autism are something in the world.
Well, that's yourself see a like Rain Man, like her, but because they did that has been, psychologist or they did this.
As Dustin Hoffman, they are what we might call obsessive compulsive disorder people.
Right.
They're very focused on doing something.
Yeah.
They probably have a high functioning degree of autism or Asperger's.
Does anybody have any questions or? Yeah.
Yep.
How did Temple react when she saw this film? I guess
she was tears at the end of the screening. I believe she'd seen her life. They had been told, that story had been told truthfully and emotionally. Strange to use, but many people with severe autism do experience emotions, but they're not kind of complex emotions like the rest of us have. The rest of us muggles have, to use a term from Harry Potter, who aren't in a special world. They're complex, subtle emotions, but the emotions that Temple has are like the emotions of an animal. Fear, anger, flight, happiness, concentration. Very limited, but very deeply felt and intense at the same time.
Wow. Mick, thank you for doing this movie.
Oh,
you're welcome.
It's a great service to humanity and why we gave you the humanitarian award at the film festival.
I will drink that award with pride.
Yeah, thank you very much. All right.